Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Triple N Media Talk Show. I am Dr. NIK NIKAM, your host from Houston, Texas. This is a COVID-19 pandemic world news. In this presentation, we are going to be focusing on global economic effects, more like eviscerating effects of COVID-19 on the global economy. Let us begin. The first cases of coronavirus were reported in Wuhan, China in the middle of January or beginning of January, and it reached a peak towards the end of January. Today, as of August 9, 2020, there are 19.89 million cases of active COVID-19 infections all across the globe, with 731,081 patients having died. And interestingly, 12.77 million people have recovered from the COVID-19 pandemic. Nonetheless, the global economic eviscerating effects have been quite unprecedented, and it continues to savage through the various sectors of the economy as the pandemic is still picking up speed and spread. One of the biggest things we saw was on the global stock market. Let's look at it. In February, here are the three graphs from Nike, which represents Japan, Dow Jones from the United States, and FTSE from Europe, particularly the United Kingdom. And towards the middle of February, most of them were at the peak for the year. In fact, in the United States, we had an all-time high in the stock market just before the coronavirus pandemic hit the world. With that, you can see there has been a colossal drop in the stock market all across the globe, not just one country. And at the peak, which was on March 23rd, the stock markets across the globe had dropped by 30 to 35%. 1/3 of the global economy was wiped out in the span of 4 to 6 weeks. Nonetheless, after March 23rd, majority of the countries have made a remarkable comeback, even though it is not a V-shaped recovery. That's because the coronavirus pandemic is still in full force all across the globe, with areas where there are already second waves creeping up. The stock market behaves in a strange manner. Not only did the stocks drop 30%, but they recovered most of the loss, and by July, the NASDAQ, which is the high-tech index, bypassed its top, and it has been consistently making new highs in the US stock market. Let's look at some of the industries that went from bad to worse. Airlines. As plane services were shut down in many parts of the world, all the airlines suffered a massive loss of revenue. In fact, some of the stocks like United Airlines dropped by 80 to 90% in their value in a span of 4 to 8 weeks. Similarly, with the airlines on a standstill, hospitality industry such as hotels, restaurants, all this were also put on a standstill status because there was no movement of people. There were no more gatherings. There were no more functions. Talking about functions, entertainment almost became a thing on the internet. There were no gatherings. There were no galas. There were no receptions. There were no graduations, all of them went online, totally wiping out the service industry altogether. Sports, where thousands, tens of thousands of people used to gather, the stadiums stayed empty, speechless after the coronavirus pandemic hit the global scene. Education went online, which also reduced the travel from students going from university back to their homes. Retail industry was totally decimated because most of the retail shops were closed, the malls were shut down. As a result, there was no traffic, so there was no income, but their expenses remained less or probably got more. Restaurant and catering. These people also got extremely hit hard because they were not able to cater to the functions. As I said, the receptions, the galas, the graduations. As a result, they suffered heavy losses, and those people who were on hourly wages literally lost everything. Tourism, cruise liners, they all suffered the same massive blow from this COVID-19 pandemic. If you look at the shopping all across the globe, we're not talking about just the United States or Europe. China had a 30, this is in 2 weeks period, in 1 week period in June just alone, China had a 32% drop in shoppers. Japan 37%, Germany 50%, France 50%, United States 50%, 50% to 80% drop in the shoppers all across the globe. That is a huge dent into the global economy and the country's gross domestic product. Here are some of the points that will show there was a silver lining among the shadowy clouds of COVID-19, 2019 and 2020. Online shopping just boomed, I should say exploded to the positive side. And here is a stock market price of Amazon.com, which had already reached a peak of $2,200 just before the markets collapsed. It lost its value to $1,700, and then that was almost like 25%, but within a matter of, I would say, 6 weeks, not only did Amazon totally recover from its losses, but it has doubled its price from $1,700 to almost $3,400 per stock. Similarly, the grocery stores and retailers like Walmart were very successful in serving the immediate needs of the community. As a result, they flourished and they were able to provide the basic necessities for the entire country's population. Grocery stores major grocery stores like Kroger, H-E-B, and many others were overworking with the number of extra clerks stocking the stores round the clock and providing necessary food, drugs, and drinks. Transportation industry, particularly the industry that was involved in transporting goods from one place to another. Since everything was ordered online, these goods had to be transported from the warehouse to the destination. And as a result, the transportation industry that was involved in moving these goods from the warehouses to the destinations flourished. In fact, during this entire crisis, all those people who worked in these critical areas exceeded more than 3.5 million right here in the United States. And of course, the healthcare supplies were scarce, not only in the United States or Europe, even in China, in Japan, and Korea. All these places, the healthcare supplies were a major challenge, and healthcare supplies. The healthcare stocks also just skyrocketed because of the increase in need for healthcare services during this prolonged episode of COVID-19 pandemic. Bankings took a big hitting. In fact, the rates were dropped to zero, and in some countries below zero. Along with that, professionals had to take a hit too, especially those who could not travel, especially those who could not be in person because of the lockdowns. Their businesses were put on hold. In the healthcare industry, more than 42,000 physicians were put on hold or on temporary leave because these are surgeons and specialists who could not perform their services in the hospital because the entire medical services were put on hold to deal with the COVID-19 patients. So all the specialty services were actually without job. And we talked about the doctors. They were the ones who were without jobs. Let us talk about the GDP, the contraction, because people were not working, people were not traveling, people were not producing as efficiently as they were when they were employed full-time. You can only do so much online. You can only do so much remotely. It may work for certain companies like tech companies like Apple, Google, or Facebook, but for those who are involved in the service industry, they suffered a major blow, and it is reflected in the drop in the GDP of all these nations across the globe. France was expected to have a 13.8% drop in their GDP. Similarly, Germany, 10%, United States, 9.5%. Actually, China is supposed to be minus 2.3%. For the first time, it saw a drop in decades because of this COVID-19 pandemic, because there was no movement of people and there was no demand for a lot of these products produced by China except for the healthcare related products. As a result, every major country in the world suffered massive damages due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Just about every country in the world had to provide economic stimulus packages to deal with this coronavirus pandemic. People were not working, people were not traveling, people were not producing, people were not getting any income, and as a result, people were losing jobs and they were getting desperate. To counteract those, every country produced the so-called COVID-19 stimulus packages, and here are some numbers. Japan, the COVID stimulus package was equal to 21.1% of their GDP. How about that? Similarly, United States had spent almost 13% of its GDP as stimulus packages delivered in various stages. We'll look into more detail about the United States. Sweden, 12%, Germany, 10%. And here are some of the countries. UK, surprisingly, only 5% of its GDP. And South Korea, which has been one of the most successful countries in controlling COVID-19, where they had no lockdown, their stimulus package was, as expected, considerably lower percentage of their GDP as compared to major countries across the globe. The oil prices hit almost a 50-year bottom, where the Brent crude oil price went from $70 down to something like $18. Well, since May, it has recovered more than half of that, but it is nowhere close to what it was just in January of this year. If you remember, a few years ago, the Brent crude was like $140 per barrel. Because of the oil price war set up between Russia and OPEC countries, because of the travel standstill, there was very little demand for the oil. So the combination of these factors totally reduced the need for oil consumption to negligible amounts compared to what they were just before the COVID hit the world scene. And there's another silver lining. While we are going through this COVID pandemic for the last 5 to 6 months, there are several companies which are in race to produce vaccines. Some of the leading companies, there are 3 companies in China. We have very little information about them, so we can't talk about them. But the Oxford Research Group, working in conjunction with AstraZeneca, is one of the lead vaccine manufacturers, which is in phase 3 of the trial. Similarly, we have 2 major companies, Pfizer and Moderna, who are in phase 3 trial of this COVID-19 vaccine. So there are always silver linings when there are dark clouds, but the question is, we want to get rid of the dark clouds. That's the most important thing. How do we do that? Anyway, if you look at a global picture of the economic eviscerating blow produced by COVID-19, majority of the countries are on the verge of recession, or they are already in recession. France, Germany, and many other countries have already been in recession. And similarly, many other countries are just trying to catch up with the virus, which continues to be like a relentless blowing wind in a hurricane, refusing to slow down. Economists are projecting the loss from this one COVID-19 pandemic could be in excess of $8.8 trillion in global economy. Let's look at unemployment. United States had hit a 50-year low unemployment of 3.5% just weeks before the coronavirus pandemic became a panic. And after that, the unemployment hit not just 10.4, it went all the way up to 14.7%, and it has just come down to roughly around 13.3%. But as we can see across the globe, the unemployment rates jumped to like 12%, 10%, 7.5%, and this is a significant factor because not only are people not working, they are not generating any money, and they have to be dependent on the stimulus packages from various governments to support their livelihood. All right, talking about stimulus packages, the United States has delivered several stimulus packages from the beginning of March until now, as of even August 8, 2020. Let's look at some of those. The Phase 1 stimulus package was signed by President Trump on March 6, which allocated $8.3 billion to support the CDC, the FDA, NIH, Small Business Administration, and United States Agency for International Development to help them better deal with the onslaught of this COVID-19 epidemic. One of the most important things was to invest money in developing good testing machines for COVID-19. So they also allocated $1 billion in loan subsidies for small businesses. It was the stimulus Phase 2 package, which included $100 billion to provide free coronavirus testing for all Americans, provide 2 weeks of paid sick leave, family leave for individuals if they got sick, increase funding for Medicaid, food and security programs, and also increased unemployment benefits. The biggest one was the Phase 3 stimulus package, which included more than $2 trillion, which was signed on March 27th by President Trump to provide bailout payments to individuals. It also included 2 payments in April and May to individual taxpayers to meet their daily requirements, costing $250 billion, for each installment. It also included $300 billion as a loan for small businesses, plus $50 billion bailout for the airline and transportation industries, and $150 billion for hospitality and retail industries, which were practically on a standstill. The Stimulus 4, which was just signed on August 8, this is basically an executive order entitling $400 per week per Americans, a payroll tax holiday until the end of 2020, no eviction clause, so people in rental properties would not be evicted, and to put student loans on hold. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is an overview of the global, eviscerating, collapsing economic effects of COVID-19. As I mentioned to you, I just want to emphasize the actual estimate of cost of this COVID-19 could be close to $8 to $9 trillion, and we are still in the first wave of the COVID-19. Thank you so much for watching this presentation, and please do subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we have more than 30 videos covering various aspects of the COVID-19 pandemic, and please do watch those and support our channel. Thank you so much for your time.